grand tapestry of legends, few threads shine as brightly as the one telling the story of the man who would become a god. In an age of darkness, when humanity was little more than a collection of scattered, warring tribes huddled in the shadow of ancient forests, a sign appeared in the heavens. A twin-tailed comet, a blazing omen of change, tore across the night sky, its arrival heralding the birth of a child in the Unberogen tribe. This child was named Sigmar, and from his first breath, he was destined not merely to lead, but to unite, to conquer, and to build a future for all mankind. As Sigmar grew into a young man, the prophecies surrounding his birth began to manifest. He was a warrior of unparalleled strength and courage, his presence on the battlefield a whirlwind of righteous fury. But it was his vision, not just his might, that set him apart. He saw a future where humanity stood united against the encroaching darkness. A future free from the petty squabbles that left them vulnerable. With a combination of brute force and keen diplomacy, he began his great work. Tribe after tribe fell to his armies or were won over by his charisma and wisdom, until the banners of the Unberogen, the Teutogans, the Thuringians, and all the great peoples flew as one. A nation was being forged in the fires of conflict and the bonds of newfound brotherhood. This nascent unity would face its greatest test before it could truly be called an empire. From the east came a threat unlike any other, a colossal greenskin horde, a green tide of orcs and goblins driven by a lust for destruction. Knowing that humanity could not stand alone against such a cataclysmic force, Sigmar journeyed into the mountains to seek an alliance with the ancient and proud dwarfs. There, he saved the life of the dwarf High King, Kurgan Ironbeard, from a greenskin ambush, earning their respect and friendship as a symbol of their new pact. King Ironbeard gifted Sigmar the legendary Warhammer Galmaraz, the Skull Splitter, an artifact of immense power. With men and dwarfs marching side by side, the allied army met the greenskin horde at the narrow, treacherous expanse of Blackfire Pass. The battle was a brutal, desperate affair, a maelstrom of steel and blood that would decide the fate of the world. The pass ran red as the outnumbered allies held the line against endless waves of savage warriors. At the height of the conflict, Sigmar carved a path through the carnage to face the monstrous orc warlord at the heart of the horde. In a legendary duel that shook the very mountains, Sigmar and Galmaraz proved triumphant, shattering the greenskin leadership and turning the tide of the war in a single thunderous blow. With the victory at Blackfire Pass, the greatest threat to humanity was broken, and the alliance between men and dwarfs was sealed in blood and glory. The tribal leaders, in recognition of his unparalleled leadership and divine purpose, unanimously knelt before Sigmar and crowned him the first emperor of a united realm. On that day, the Empire of Man was born, a bastion of civilization and order that would endure for millennia. Its foundations laid by the warrior king who had answered destiny's call. And so the story of Sigmar was no longer just a legend. It was history, an epic tale etched into the very soul of the empire he created. From the blood and ash of Blackfire Pass, the empire was born, where scattered tribes once fought and died alone. A unified nation now stood, forged by the will of one man, Sigmar. Having defeated the greenskin hordes, he was crowned the first emperor. For 50 years, Sigmar reigned, transforming barbarian tribes into a thriving nation. But peace is a fragile thing. A shadow from the ancient past stirred. Nagash, the great necromancer, led a skeletal legion from the south. At the Battle of the River Rake, Sigmar faced this ancient evil. It was a clash of life against oblivion. Sigmar's valor proved stronger. He struck Nagash down, a victory that would be sung for millennia. Yet a greater darkness was gathering. From the far north, a new champion arose, Morkar, the first ever chosen, the harbinger of the end times. He led a legion of twisted warriors against the fledgling empire. Sigmar, the champion of light, met him on the field of battle. The divine power of Sigmar clashed with the raw, corrupting energy of chaos. In a final cataclysmic strike, Sigmar defeated Morkar, casting the ever-chosen back into darkness. With every threat vanquished, his work was done. After 50 years of rule, Emperor Sigmar laid down his crown. He walked away from his throne, from his legend, into the chaos wastes. This was not a death, but a transformation. Sigmar Heldenhammer, the man, was gone. In his place rose Sigmar, the god king of the empire, its eternal guardian. For a millennium, he was the light of the empire, a god king whose presence was a shield against the darkness. But what happened when that light vanished? This is the story of the Reichland, a land of faith and ambition, and its tumultuous journey through the first 500 years after its founder, the god emperor Sigmar, walked away from the world of men. When Sigmar laid down his hammer, Gal Maraz, and journeyed into the east, he left behind more than just a legend. He left a gaping power vacuum. In his ancestral homeland of the Reichland, a profound uncertainty descended. The fertile plains and the mighty river Reich, once symbols of his strength, now lay under a somber, watchful sky. The throne in Altdorf sat empty, and the great project of a united empire began to fracture. The Age of Solitude had begun, a dark and uncertain time where the legacy of the first emperor was both a sacred memory and a political prize to be won. Without their unifying sovereign, the people of the Reichland, and indeed all the tribes of the nascent empire, were lost, adrift in a world growing colder and more dangerous, not on the battlefield, but in the hearts of the common folk. In the bustling streets of Altdorf, a humble mendicant friar named Johann Hellstorm began to preach a radical new doctrine. He spoke not of Sigmar the king, but of Sigmar the god, a divine protector who had ascended to watch over his people from the heavens. His words were a fire that caught in the dry tinder of a populace desperate for hope. The cult of Sigmar spread with astonishing speed, its message of divine guardianship and martial piety resonating deeply. The first crude temples were erected, which soon gave way to grand cathedrals, and the Reichland became the undisputed heartland of this new and powerful faith. While the soul of the Reichland was being reforged by faith, its political ambitions festered. The powerful and wealthy princes of Altdorf, citing their direct lineage and control over Sigmar's former capital, began to proclaim themselves as his rightful successors. They adopted the title of emperor, but their claims rang hollow beyond their own borders. The other elector counts, rulers of proud and independent provinces like Middenland and Talabecland, refused to bend the knee. They viewed the rulers of Altdorf as little more than Reichland pretenders, upstart nobles grasping for a crown they had not earned. The empire devolved into a patchwork of squabbling states, its grand council scenes of bitter recrimination and political stalemate. Yet in a strange paradox, as the empire's political unity crumbled, the Reichland itself flourished. The province's strategic position and immense natural wealth shielded it from the worst of the era's strife. The River Reich, the artery of the nation, teemed with merchant vessels, their hulls heavy with goods from Marienburg to the southern provinces. Its fields, among the most fertile in the Old World, yielded bountiful harvests year after year, feeding its growing population and funding the ambitions of its rulers. While rival nobles plotted in their grim northern fortresses, the lords of the Reichland built magnificent palaces and patronized the arts, their prosperity a stark and glittering contrast to the political chaos they had helped create. Thus, the first 500 years of the post-Sigmar era closed upon a Reichland transformed. It was no longer just a tribal heartland, but the center of a powerful new religion and an economic powerhouse whose wealth was the envy of the old world. But this legacy was forged in both faith and ambition, a dual identity that would define its future. The Reichland's spiritual authority was absolute, but its rulers' secular claims to the imperial throne remained fiercely contested, and the coming centuries would see the sons of the Reichland strive to unite the empire once more, not just with prayer, but with steel. When the last of the line of Sigmar's blood had passed, the land once forged by a god fell into shadow and ruin, for the promise of unity had become a distant and fading memory. The passing of Emperor Mandred Skavenslayer in 1152 plunged the empire into an age of bitter rivalry and ambition. Grand Duke Siegfried of Reichland, in a bold but disastrous move, laid claim to the vacant throne. Yet his authority was fiercely contested, sparking a destructive era known to history as the Age of the Reichland Pretenders. This act of defiance fractured the realm, igniting the flames of the time of three emperors. For centuries, the armies of Reichland, Middenland, and Talabecland would clash in a brutal civil war. Their banners, once symbols of a united people, now raised only in hatred and division. The dream of a single empire was drowned in a sea of blood. For nearly 400 years, this agonizing division defined the land. The imperial throne, once the seat of absolute power, became a hollow prize, its legitimacy challenged and its authority meaningless beyond the walls of a single city. The elector counts, sworn to protect the realm, instead tore it apart, their provincial rivalries superseding any loyalty to the whole. In this time of decay, Reichland turned inward. It withdrew from the endless squabbles for the crown, focusing instead on its own defense and the burgeoning trade that flowed down the great River Reich. Its immense wealth derived from the bustling ports of Altdorf and Nuln, became a solitary beacon of prosperity in a land scarred by perpetual conflict. Reichland grew rich and powerful in its isolation, a kingdom unto itself while the empire around it crumbled. This was the Age of Three Emperors, a dark chapter that began not with an external invasion, but with the poison of internal division seeping into the very heart of Sigmar's mighty realm. Following the death of Emperor Mandred Skaven's lair, the Elector Counts, blinded by greed and provincial pride, failed to unite behind a single successor. The Imperial crown, once a symbol of unity, became a prize to be fought over. From this bitter soil of dissent, three major claimants sprouted, each carving out their own domain from the fractured whole. In the opulent south, the Elector Countess of Nolan staked her claim, backed by the wealth of the southern provinces and the authority of the Grand Theogonist of Sigmar's cult. To the north, in the cold, wolf-haunted forests of Middenland, the Grand Duke declared himself emperor, invoking the ancient power of the god Ulrich and challenging the spiritual supremacy of Altdorf. A third, an opportunistic pretender backed by the merchants of Marienburg, soon emerged, further muddying the waters of succession. The empire was no longer one, but three, and the age of civil war had begun. What followed were centuries of relentless, grinding conflict. Brother fought brother, and province warred against province in a seemingly endless cycle of bloodshed that came to be known as the Great Wars. The authority of the emperor, once absolute, dissolved into a patchwork of competing warlords and petty kings. Armies marched across the land not to defend its borders, but to sack its cities, leaving a trail of devastation and misery. This political schism was deepened by a religious one. The rivalry between the cult of Sigmar and the cult of Ulrich intensified, becoming a holy war within a holy war. Priests preached damnation against their rivals, and faith, which once bound the nation together, now served as another justification for its slaughter. As the empire bled itself white, its strength dwindling with every passing generation, dark forces stirred beyond its weakened borders. In the annals of the empire, few eras shone with such brilliance as the reign of Emperor Sigismund IV, a time remembered as the Golden Age of Reichland. Within the heart of his domain, the grand city of Altdorf stood as a beacon of progress and prosperity, its gleaming spires piercing the heavens as a testament to humanity's ambition. Along its cobbled streets, commerce flowed like a mighty river, fed by the tireless efforts of the Reichland merchant fleet whose ships plied the waterways, their holds laden with riches from across the old world. This was an age of enlightenment, marked by the founding of the legendary colleges of magic, where wizards honed their arcane arts, weaving spells of light and creation under the watchful eye of the emperor. The air itself seemed to hum with promise, a symphony of progress that many believed would never end. Yet beyond the civilized heartlands, in the dark and tangled depths of the Reichwald forest and the towering peaks of the Black Mountains, a malevolent shadow began to stir. The first signs were small, almost insignificant, isolated farmsteads found burned to the ground, their inhabitants butchered, whispers of green-skinned marauders haunting the forest paths. These were the vanguard of a gathering storm. From the squalor of his crude fortress, the notoriously cunning and brutal orc warlord, Gorbad Ironclaw, was forging a weapon of unimaginable destruction. With promises of plunder and a guttural charisma that resonated with the greenskins' lust for war, he united the feuding tribes, binding them into a singular, terrifying force, a Waaagh, poised to drown the world of men in a tide of green savagery. When Gorbad's Waaagh finally descended from the mountains, it was not a raid but an apocalypse, a monstrous sea of green flesh, seething with hatred and armed with crude yet brutally effective weapons, crashed against the borders of the empire. The province of Solland was the first to fall, its armies shattered, its elector count slain, and its people scattered to the winds. The tide of destruction swept onward, consuming Nolan and then turning its avaricious gaze toward the very heart of the empire. The Imperial army, led by the Emperor himself, fought with desperate courage but was relentlessly pushed back. For every orc they struck down, 10 more seemed to take its place, their war cries a deafening roar that shook the resolve of even the most veteran soldiers. Eventually, the green tide broke against the formidable walls of Altdorf itself. Gorbad Ironclaw, astride his savage boar Narla, gazed upon the capital, the ultimate prize for his campaign of annihilation. The siege that followed would become the stuff of legend and nightmare. Day and night, the city was battered by a relentless storm of iron and stone launched from crude but powerful orc war machines. Hulking trolls and savage orc boys swarmed the ramparts in ceaseless waves, their numbers seeming infinite as they clawed and hacked their way up siege ladders and towers. Yet Altdorf would not yield. The disciplined state troops held the line with grim determination, their halberds and handguns exacting a bloody toll. From the highest towers, the battle wizards of the colleges of magic unleashed cataclysmic energies, incinerating entire regiments of greenskins in torrents of arcane fire and bolts of pure amethyst lightning. In the end, the city's defiance proved stronger than the Waagh's fury. During a final desperate assault, Gorbad Ironclaw was grievously wounded in a duel with the Emperor, a blow that shattered not only his body, but the singular will that held his horde together. Without their leader's driving presence, the Greenskin army fractured, dissolving back into the squabbling, disorganized tribes from which it was born. And so, the story of the Great Siege was written not in ink, but in the blood spilled upon the ramparts and the defiant stone of Altdorf's walls. The city was battered, scarred, and grieving, but its heart remained unbroken, a defiant bastion of civilization that had stared into the abyss and refused to fall. In the annals of human history, few periods were as fraught with suffering and despair as the centuries that followed the Great Waaagh of the Orc warlord Gorbad Ironclaw. The greenskin tide had receded, but it left behind a realm in ruin. The once proud empire was a shadow of its former self, its provinces shattered and isolated, its people struggling to rebuild amidst the ashes. The death of the emperor without a clear heir plunged the nation into a bitter civil war, an age of division and bloodshed that would be known as the Time of Three Emperors. For nearly 400 years, rival claimants tore the nation apart, their armies clashing in brutal conflicts that bled the empire dry and left it vulnerable from within. It was into this fractured land that a new and insidious evil emerged from the cursed province of Sylvania. Vlad von Carstein, the enigmatic and charismatic count, revealed his true monstrous nature. He was a creature of the night, a vampire of ancient power, and he laid claim to the Imperial throne by right of a long-dead bloodline. From the barrows and graveyards of his haunted domain, he raised a legion of the damned. Skeletal warriors, shambling zombies, and vast swarms of fellbats marched under his banner. An unstoppable tide of undeath that crashed against the realms of men. The province of Stirland was the first to fall, and soon Vlad's army stood before the very gates of Altdorf, the heart of the empire. Though Vlad was eventually slain, the nightmare was far from over. The vampire wars would grind on for generations. A long and terrible struggle against his mad successor Conrad and the cunning arch-necromancer Manfred. As the empire poured its dwindling strength into holding back the undead menace, a different kind of darkness began to fester within its borders. The endless wars had created a fertile ground for despair and corruption, allowing the insidious whispers of the ruinous powers to take root. In the sprawling, overcrowded cities, hidden cults dedicated to the worship of chaos gods proliferated in the shadows, plotting the downfall of civilization. Beyond the city walls, the deep forests grew darker and more malevolent. The beastmen, the twisted children of chaos, grew bolder than ever before, raiding settlements with impunity and slaughtering all in their path, their animalistic howls a prelude to the greater horrors to come. The empire was besieged from without and rotting from within, its foundations cracking under the immense strain. The long and bloody vampire wars finally concluded with the defeat of Manfred von Carstein at the Battle of Helfen, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The empire was left depopulated by plague and conflict, its coffers empty and its spirit utterly broken. The once mighty nation stood on the precipice of total collapse, a hollowed-out shell of its former glory. It was in this moment of ultimate weakness that the true storm finally gathered. Far to the north, beyond the chilling expanse of Kislev, a vast and terrible host assembled. Legions of chaos warriors clad in dark iron, grotesque demons born of nightmare, and gibbering mutants beyond count gathered under the banners of the dark gods. And so, as one age of darkness drew to a close, a far greater one was about to begin. For the great war against chaos was at hand. In the grim tapestry of the old world, where the threads of civilization are constantly frayed by darkness, some conflicts are not mere battles, but apocalyptic crusades that define an entire age. This is the story of the Great War against Chaos, a saga of a world on the brink of annihilation, and the rise of the unlikeliest of saviors. From the nightmarish chaos wastes in the far north, a tide of pure evil began to swell. At its heart was Asavar Kul, a warlord of unparalleled might and cruelty, who had earned the favor of all four chaos gods. Crowned the Ever-Chosen, he united the squabbling northern tribes and demonic legions into a single unstoppable horde. Clad in rune-scarred armor and wielding a colossal axe, Kull was the very avatar of destruction, and his gaze turned south, hungry for the weak and fractured lands of men. Like a biblical plague, Kull's army descended upon the hardy northern realm of Kislev. The Chaos Horde was a maelstrom of mutated warriors, bloodthirsty demons, and twisted siege engines that left only ruin and despair in their wake. They smashed through Kislev's defenses, culminating in the horrific siege of the city of Prague. The city was taken, and its very stones were warped by chaos energies into a monument of terror, a grim warning of the fate that awaited the rest of the world. The empire to the south was fractured, its provinces bickering and its armies unprepared for the sheer scale of the invasion. As desperation choked the hearts of men, a new voice of defiance rang out from the city of Nuln. He was Magnus, a charismatic nobleman and devout Sigmarite preacher who came to be known as the Pious. He traveled the fractured empire with fiery conviction, his words a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. He condemned the corruption of the aristocracy and inspired the common folk, rallying disparate armies under a single banner. For the first time in generations, the provinces of the empire put aside their rivalries, united by Magnus's unyielding faith against a common existential threat. The two colossal armies finally met before the gates of Kislev in a battle that would decide the fate of the world. The disciplined state troops of the empire clashed with the gibbering monstrosities of chaos in a whirlwind of steel and sorcery. At the heart of the conflict, two champions faced each other: the Herald of Darkness, Asavar Kull, and the champion of humanity, Magnus the Pious. In a legendary duel, the Golden Gal Miraz, the sacred Warhammer of Sigmar, met the demonic axe of the Ever-Chosen. With a final desperate blow fueled by faith and fury, Magnus struck down the seemingly invincible warlord. With their master slain, the Chaos Horde shattered, the demonic legions dissolved, and the northern tribes broke and fled back to the wastes from whence they came. The world was saved. Hailed as the savior of the empire, Magnus the Pious was unanimously elected as the new emperor. His reign marked the beginning of a new, unified age, most famously remembered for his founding of the Colleges of Magic, ensuring the empire would forever have the arcane might to stand against the darkness. In the grim darkness of the old world, even an age of gold can be built upon foundations of rot, its luster merely a prelude to the encroaching shadow. For more than a century after the reign of Magnus the Pious, the Empire of Man knew a semblance of peace and prosperity, a golden era of progress. Trade routes flourished, carrying wealth between bustling cities, and in the grand spires of Altdorf, the colleges of magic reached the zenith of their power, their arcane knowledge a beacon against the darkness. Yet this light was destined to dim. As generations passed, the successors to Magnus grew complacent, their ambitions turning from the defense of the realm to the petty squabbles of courtly life. In the gilded halls of the Imperial Palace, nobles bickered over titles and territories, their eyes fixed on personal gain while the true threat to their world festered far from their sight. They had forgotten the ancient evils that lurked just beyond the firelight, and their ignorance would cost them everything. Beneath the very foundations of their thriving cities, a cancer was spreading. In the sprawling, lightless expanse of the Under-Empire, a race of chittering, malevolent ratmen plotted the ruin of the surface dwellers. They were the Skaven, and their verminous god, the great horned rat, gnawed at the roots of the world, demanding the utter subjugation of all other life. In the stinking capital of Skavenblight, the Council of 13, the dreadlords of the Ratmen, convened to orchestrate their grand design. They would not conquer the empire with armies alone. They would first shatter it from within, rotting its core until it was ripe for the taking. Soon, their most cunning agents, the deadly gutter runners, slinked through the sewers and shadows of imperial cities. Key officials were found dead in locked rooms, their throats slit by unseen blades, while vital wells and granaries were tainted with unspeakable filth, seeding the doom that was to come. What followed was a horror that would forever be seared into the memory of the Empire, the Black Plague. Unleashed by the Skaven's insidious machinations, the pestilence swept across the land like a suffocating tide, turning prosperous provinces into mass graves. Cities that once rang with the clamor of commerce fell silent, their streets choked with the dead and dying. Society crumbled under the weight of unimaginable loss, devolving into a maelstrom of paranoia and fear. In their desperation, the people turned on one another. Fanatical witch hunters, seeing demonic influence in every shadow, conducted ruthless purges, burning entire communities and blaming innocents for a pestilence they could not comprehend. As the Empire's defenses faltered and its populace succumbed to sickness and despair, the Skaven finally emerged. Swarming from their tunnels in uncountable numbers, they dragged away the dead for their foul experiments and overwhelmed the few remaining garrisons, claiming the blighted cities for their own. Just as the last embers of hope were about to be extinguished, a hero rose from the ashes of the fallen empire. His name was Mandred, a brilliant general who refused to yield to despair. Rallying the ragged survivors, he waged a desperate, bloody war against the tide of vermin, fighting for every inch of blighted soil. Through sheer tenacity and tactical genius, Mandred led humanity in a great counterattack, pushing the Skaven back from the gates of Altdorf and eventually driving their shattered hordes back into the subterranean darkness from whence they came. For his valor, he was crowned emperor, a ruler forged in the crucible of his people's greatest trial. Yet the victory was a hollow one. The empire was saved, but at a cost that beggared belief. The land was desolate and depopulated, its great cities scarred and haunted. The Golden Age was now a distant, bittersweet memory, replaced by a new reality of grim paranoia and a desperate, unending struggle for survival. The world had been shown the true face of the enemy below, and it would never know true peace again. In an age defined by division and despair, the sprawling lands of the empire teetered on the brink of total collapse. This was not a realm united, but a fractured mosaic of provinces, each ruled by a powerful elector count who governed their domain as a personal kingdom. The authority of the emperor had become a whisper in the wind, a faded memory of a more glorious time. In the grand capital of Altdorf, the halls of power echoed not with plans for salvation, but with the subtle poison of intrigue. Here, decadent nobles played their games of influence, vying for personal gain while the pillars of their nation crumbled around them. Beyond the city walls, the common folk endured a life of constant fear. The Imperial roads, once arteries of commerce and communication, were now hunting grounds for bandits and worse, while the deep, dark forests stirred with the movement of unspeakable monsters. The Empire was a nation besieged, trapped in a cycle of ceaseless attritional warfare that bled its frontiers dry. Along the fog-shrouded edges of the Drakewald, disciplined lines of state troopers stood as a bulwark against the encroaching darkness. They held their pikes steady and their faith in Sigmar firm as a savage beastman horde. A tide of horns and snarling fury erupted from the tree line to crash against their shields in a desperate defense of a humble village. Far to the south, another front burned with equal intensity. Across the Black Mountains, green-skinned warbands descended in a torrent of violence, their guttural war cries heralding raids of fire and slaughter. Local armies, often outnumbered and outmatched, were forced into brutal, grinding battles to protect their lands from the orc menace, fighting for every inch of blood-soaked soil. Yet for all the dangers that assailed it from without, the most insidious threat festered within the Empire's own heart. Hidden from the sight of gods and men, the cancer of chaos spread through the very veins of society. In opulent manors and shadowy cellars, wealthy merchants and disillusioned aristocrats gathered in secret conclaves. They whispered forbidden names and performed blasphemous rituals, offering their souls to the ruinous powers in exchange for power, knowledge, or release from their mortal fears. But where corruption grows, so too does the resolve to purge it. A grim-faced witch hunter, guided by suspicion and faith, would uncover one such cult's profane lair. In the stinking underbelly of a great city, his discovery would ignite a desperate, close-quarters battle against fanatics and demons. A stark reminder that the enemy was not only at the gates but also behind the door. Amidst this turmoil, the frail emperor died, his passing creating a power vacuum that threatened to tear the nation apart completely. As tradition demanded, the elector counts gathered once more in Altdorf to choose his successor. The great halls buzzed with tense negotiations, with old rivalries flaring and new alliances forged in whispered promises. The fate of millions rested on the ambitions of a few powerful men, each believing they alone held the right to rule. It was in this crucible of political conflict that a new hope emerged. Against the expectations of the cynical and the schemes of the corrupt, the conclave elected Karl Franz of Reichland. He was young, vigorous, and possessed of an unyielding will, a beacon of light in a deeply troubled age. Thus the stage was set for a saga that would be written in blood and steel, as a new era dawned for the beleaguered realm. Crowned in a grand ceremony, Karl Franz donned the full plate armor of his station, the weight of an entire nation settling upon his shoulders. The story of his reign would begin not in a throne room, but on the battlefield. It would begin with the thunder of hooves, with the sight of the new emperor himself, atop his mighty war griffin Deathclaw, leading the resplendent Reichsguard knights in a glorious charge. He was a symbol of unity and defiance, ready to face the legions of darkness, to purge the rot from within, and to forge a new destiny for the Empire. History is not always a tale of progress and triumph. Sometimes it is a chronicle of a world's final, desperate breath. Today we journey back to a world on the brink of annihilation, a story of heroism and despair that culminated in the ultimate victory of chaos. For this is the saga of the end times. The coronation of Emperor Karl Franz, meant to be a moment of imperial renewal, was instead marked by the darkest of omens. Across the lands of men, the skies grew unnaturally dim, and virulent plagues, unlike any seen before, swept through the populace with merciless efficiency. From the deep woods and twisted forests, the beastmen hordes, ancient enemies of civilization, boiled forth in numbers that defied all reckoning, their guttural roars a prelude to the slaughter to come. Far to the north, within the swirling madness of the chaos wastes, a far greater threat was gathering. Archaon, the ever-chosen and the herald of the apocalypse, had finally succeeded in uniting the warring tribes of chaos, forging them into a single unstoppable legion bent on the utter destruction of the world. A new star appeared in the heavens, a twin-tailed comet that should have been a sign of hope, a symbol of the Empire's founder, Sigmar. Yet this celestial body blazed with a malevolent light heralding not salvation, but an era of unprecedented doom. Under its ill-fated gaze, in the cursed land of Sylvania, a dark and blasphemous ritual reached its terrible conclusion. Nagash, the great necromancer, the supreme lord of all undeath, was torn back into the mortal plane. With his resurrection, a chilling silence fell over the graves of the world, as he began to exert his singular iron will, gathering every ghost, ghoul, and skeleton to his banner to forge a new and terrifying kingdom of the dead. The storm that had gathered in the north finally broke upon the realms of men. Archaon's invasion began, a tide of demons and corrupted warriors that shattered the bulwark nation of Kislev before pouring into the northern provinces of the Empire like a flood. As the north burned, a second chaos host appeared in the south, led by the grotesque Glotkin, three brothers who were the chosen champions of the plague god Nurgle. Their pestilent army laid siege to the imperial capital of Altdorf itself. After a grueling battle, the city fell, its streets choked with disease and its defenders overwhelmed. In the chaos of Altdorf's destruction, Emperor Karl Franz was struck down, his reign seemingly at an end. But fate was not yet finished with him. Touched by divine power, he was reborn, infused with the celestial energies of the heavens to become a living incarnate. In the face of total annihilation, the last remnants of the civilized races made their final, desperate stand. Led by the ascended Karl Franz and a fellowship of other mortal heroes who had become incarnates of the winds of magic, they gathered at the fortress city of Middenheim for a last battle against Archaon's endless horde. Elsewhere, Nagash and his undead legions waged their own war against the forces of chaos, not as allies to the living, but as rivals pursuing their own grim ambitions to rule a world of corpses. The final battle for the world was a cataclysm of magic and steel. But heroism was not enough. The defenders were broken, and Archaon stood victorious over the last champions of order. At the heart of the city, he activated a colossal doomsday device, beginning the final terrible act. The world was unmade. Reality itself tore apart at the seams as the raw, unfiltered power of the Chaos Realm flooded into existence, consuming everything. The very planet cracked like an egg, its continents dissolving into a vortex of pure, primordial energy. The final image was of a world consumed, a sphere of life and history vanishing into the infinite, hungry void. Thus concluded the final, brutal chapter of the Warhammer world, a grim testament to the fact that in the end, chaos would claim all.